Hey everyone, it's Raghu back with Mindrolling, and I have a wonderful new guest today. His name is Norman Ohler, and wait till you hear about what he has in store. Norman, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me, talking to me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, Norman lives in Berlin, actually, and the magic of the digital age, we're able to connect from California to Berlin, Germany. And actually, you just had a huge thing go on, right? Politically, a big election, right?
Yeah, we had national elections yesterday,
Yeah.
and we have probably a new chancellor.
Uh huh. And
Oh, he's a scumbag from the Conservative Party. Everyone hates
oh
him,
god,
but still he won. I don't know. No one knows why.
no one knows why. Oh my god. Oh. Well, but he's anyhow. Politics isn't our thing here, but I just
Yeah.
it just happened, so it's like in a right
Well,
on and
also the left was quite strong, so that was good.
mm,
I mean, we don't have a two-party system like America. We have a multi-party system, so it's a bit more um,
fragmented, right?
fragmented and diverse.
Mm.
So we
All
have
right.
always coalition governments.
Yeah, right, right. Um, Anyhow, Norman wrote an amazing book called Tripped: Nazi Germany, the CIA, and the Dawn of the Psychedelic Age. And I'm just going to read, this will give you an idea, the core idea. The fact that the US government was introduced to LSD through Nazi research shaped much of the federal government's early attitudes around it and other psychedelics. Once the Nazis elicited a potential weaponized use for LSD, the drug was never able to shake that taint. An entire class of medicines with the potential to help treat diseases that otherwise are essentially incurable was caught between the collapsing Nazi regime and the early stirrings of the Cold War and saw its promise shattered. That's a heavy statement, right? Geez, God.
Gotta think about that for a moment
Yeah, really,
or
really.
explain it.
Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and do that? Explain that out a little bit.
Um, well, I have been interested in psychedelics for a long time, actually, since I first took LSD kind of involuntarily, because my girlfriend gave it to me in downtown Manhattan in the 90s, and I didn't really know what it was.
She
But it
didn't
was
tell you
quite
what? She didn't tell you?
well. Yeah, she said LSD, but I was quite. I was never educated about drugs because in Germany it's not taught in school. So I knew a lot about other things, but nothing about drugs. So I was just curious, and it was very strong. So it was
Oh, yeah?
very interesting that first trip, and
This is your popping around Manhattan high on acid?
yeah, Saturday night,
Oh,
10 p.m. About the
great.
worst setting you can have.
Oh, no setting.
No, I also didn't know about these terms.
Mm, mm.
I just ate a little piece of paper and nothing happened for an hour, and I thought this is nothing's working, and then it started working, and it was very interesting what happened that night. Crazy. I am a writer, so for me it was absolutely fascinating that my brain would think differently and that I would have different perceptions. So I kept an interest in LSD, personal interest for many years up until now, but I never really thought about writing a book about it until um, I saw research that had been done, a clinical study that had been done in the US, that low dosages of LSD could help against Alzheimer disease. And since my mother suffers from that, I discussed this with my father because he takes care of my mother. And my father used to be a judge, and so he's always interested in the truth. But he's kind of he was a kind of philosophical guy always. So he told me that in court, what he thought, what he considered the truth it's basically the best story. I mean, there's nothing. It's not more than a story, but that's all he can go by as a judge. The story that sounds believable. So he asked me if LSDs might be beneficial to my wife's ailment. Why can I not buy it in the pharmacy? And you better bring me a good story. Bring me the truth on LSD. Why is it not a medicine if it's potentially good for people or for the brain, or can have those effects? So this kind of sent me on a research mission, which then became the book Tripped. And
so this is all recent, though, right?
I mean, it's my newest book, so
with your father and thinking about the possibility of her getting, your mother getting help.
Yeah, I mean, it started about 2021 or 22, and then the research took some time, and then the writing. Yeah, it suddenly became a personal thing to actually write a book now on psychedelics, and it has become sort of my specialty to examine drugs and history, because I wrote this book on drugs being used during the so-called Third Reich, Nazi Germany. So I kind of had a bit of experience in researching around that time, and as we all know, LSD was discovered in 1943 during World War II. So I had a look at it. I went to the archives of Novartis, which is one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, which had at one point in the 90s swallowed another company called Sandoz, and Sandoz had been, had discovered LSD in 43. So all of those files and documents were in the Novartis archive in Basel. So that's where I started my research to try to figure out what went wrong. Why didn't LSD become a mental health medicine in the mid 40s? Was it not good, or what? I was curious, and in the process, I wanted to find out like exactly what happened, and where did it not go through in the process of becoming a medication.
I mean, the research you did, by the way, it's extraordinary what you unearthed.
I found it interesting to look at actually that very early history of LSD, because when we think of LSD, we immediately think of the 60s, obviously, because so much happened with LSD back then, and that's also the decade when it became illegal, because it had such a big impact on the cultural scene, especially in the United States. But I wanted to kind of examine the chapter before, the first chapter of LSD, and I found some things which I think have not been found before, and that's what hopefully makes the book Tripped interesting.
Give us an example, would you?
What I found out?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when I was at the archives of Novartis, the archivist, he didn't really like me to look into LSD too deeply. I could sense that. And he kind of said, everyone comes here. It's not like hundreds of people go there every day, but he said most people who come to my archive are interested in LSD. Why is everyone so into LSD? And I said, well, it's the most fascinating product that the company ever made. And he said, well, it's not a product. It was never put on the market.
Yeah. Right.
Which is partly true only because, LSD was available for researchers. Sandoz gave it out. So it was at one point a product, but it was never really marketed. It was kind of a product in trial phase, you could say. But what he wanted me to look at were the papers of Albert Hoffman, the chemist who had actually discovered LSD. And a lot has been written about Albert Hoffman, and he's truly a fascinating chemist because he's like the normal Swiss guy chemist,
Yeah.
who suddenly becomes, the father of LSD. So and he really grew up, he grew into that role, and it became it defined his whole life basically. And he really believed in LSD, and so that's an interesting story, but it's a story that we know, and I was not really satisfied with what I saw at the archives. I mean, I saw the original lab books. I could see like the handwriting of Albert Hoffman on the day where he did the first planned self-experiment, and you couldn't, write anymore after like 40 minutes because the effect was too strong, even though he took the dose that he thought was the smallest dose where you could maybe still feel something, which is 250 micrograms, which is a very strong dose as we know today, but that was what he thought would be like
Oh, really?
a threshold dose. So that was, of course, interesting, but I still was not satisfied with what I didn't understand. I didn't see enough, and I discussed this with another archivist who was working there, a woman, and she said, well, actually, I think you should talk to a scientist who tried to figure out last year the same thing that you try to figure out. And he was a Swiss scientist living on a mountain. And she gave me the address, and I wrote to him, and he said, yeah, come by, let's talk. And I went to the mountain the next day. And that night I was lying in a hammock up there after we had a long discussion on why LSD never became a medicine, but instead became an illegal drug. The notorious drug LSD, it has it has a very controversial reputation. A lot of people are still afraid of LSD because of all that has happened. So he said, actually, no, he didn't say that, but I realized that lying in the hammock that I have to look at the notes of the CEO of Sandoz, because he actually called the shots, and his name is Arthur Stoll. He was the boss of Albert Hoffman. So I went back the next day, and the archivist was not very happy that I would come back again to the archive. And I kind of could sense that he was unconsciously hiding information. Like, archivists are supposed to make information available, but
Yeah.
this is a company archive, so it's not the same as a public archive. His job also is to protect the company, That's his main job, I would say. So he was not so happy, and but still I was able to trick him or I actually bribed him, because I had some LSD with me, and I said, do you want some LSD? And he said, well, how? I don't know. I've never seen it. I don't know. Where would I get it? It's illegal. And I said, well, I have some. I can give you some, just so you have, so you have a trip in your archive. You can archive it. And he kind of thought that was funny. And I gave him a trip, and then he said, okay, what do you want to see now? And he just said, okay, well, I'm going to store it and, just have it. It's nice to have it, he said. And I said, so what do you want to see now? And I said, well, I want to see the papers of your CEO, Arthur Stoll, from 1943 until like the early 50s. And he said, okay, I'll get it for you. And then I looked through these papers for a couple of hours, and then I realized something that I thought was important, and that was a relationship that the CEO of Sandoz, Arthur Stoll, had. The closest relationship, the closest friendship with another researcher he had was with Richard Kuhn. I actually had not known about Richard Kuhn before, even though Richard Kuhn is a Nobel Prize winner for chemistry, and he was one of the leading German biochemists in the first half of the 20th century. And Kuhn and Stoll had the same master, which is Richard Wildstetter, a Jewish German biochemist, also Nobel Prize winner, who had been their teacher. Both of these guys learned their trade
From him.
from Wildstetter. And Wildstetter, he kind of invented biochemistry. Like, he was one of the fathers of biochemistry. His idea was that we can actually extract powerful alkaloids from plants and turn them into medicines. So that's a branch that then Arthur Stoll at Sandoz, being the CEO, kind of followed. Yeah. So Sandoz was they didn't focus on synthetic chemistry; they focused on biochemistry. And the plant that Arthur Stoll got really interested in is ergot, this fungus that grows on rye, and quite a few pharmaceutical companies were trying to decode ergot and trying to utilize the alkaloids inside for medicines, but that all failed because ergot is very difficult, or was, at least in the early 20th century, very difficult to examine, to extract. Well, it was, I don't know, it wasn't easy, but Stoll actually cracked it, and the first medicines that Sandoz produced in the 20s of the 20th century were all ergot-based medicines. The first one was a migraine, against migraine, and then they had something against that was used when birth was given to contract the blood vessels so that the bleedings would stop. So Sandoz was quite successful with these ergot medicines. And LSD was just one. Then later, in the 40s, they it was also, it was just like a normal development for them to look, also if there's a stimulant. Hoffman was actually looking for a stimulant based on ergot, and then he found LSD. But what I want to get to is that relationship of Stoll with Kuhn, and Kuhn was also very interested in ergot research. He had his own lab in Germany while Stoll was in Basel, Switzerland. And they exchanged, I could see all the letters between these two men. They exchanged all their knowledge in the 20s and in the 30s about ergot research. And the interesting thing is then in 33, just like yesterday, we had the elections. In 33, we also had elections. And after those elections, a right-wing guy called Hitler became chancellor in Germany. And within a few months, Germany turned from a democracy into a vicious dictatorship. And Kuhn and quite a lot of scientists actually left Germany at the time. I mean, Jewish scientists, but also leftist scientists or people who just didn't like a right-wing dictatorship left Germany. But Richard Kuhn stayed. And he became, actually, because he did stay, he became, he got subsidies and funding, and he became like he actually became a Nazi scientist, you could say. Like, he started he was also teaching at university, and he started some of his lectures with saying Heil Hitler and stuff like that. So he was in the system researching. Then also when the war started, he was in charge of researching biochemical and developing biochemical weapons very successfully. He developed a deadly nerve gas. So he was a bad guy, you could say, but Kuhn and Stoll remained friends, like the Swiss CEO. Also, Switzerland was neutral, so when the Nazis took power in Germany, it was not like that they would cut all the ties they had with Germans. Kuhn and Stoll were still friends and still exchanging all of their information. Not all, but a lot of information they exchanged. Also on ergot and also on LSD. When LSD was discovered in 1943, Kuhn was also, he knew about it because Stoll wrote to him about it. We discovered this substance. Because you have to understand that the company didn't know really what LSD was. Hoffman reported back that he took this very small dose of 250 micrograms, and it changed his thinking and his perception, and he doesn't really know what it is, but the company should investigate, look at it. It might be good might be a mental health product, might be stimulant. They weren't really sure. And at the time, Kuhn was, his job at the time was trying to find a truth drug. This was one of the obsessions by the Nazis, especially the Gestapo and the SS, to find a truth drug,
Right.
which didn't exist at the time, and I mean still doesn't exist. But the idea existed that you give someone in an interrogation a substance which then enables you to extract all the secrets that you desire from that person. You basically make that person helpless in the interrogation situation. Because the Nazis were paranoid, and Hitler always thought like everyone is a traitor, and so a truth drug could be an important tool for a paranoid system. So Kuhn was in charge of finding that. So when he heard from Stoll that there was something like lysergic acid diethylamide, a very strange compound that has such strong effects on the mind, he became very interested in it and requested a sample and received the sample in October 1943. He received 0.5 gram, which is quite a lot, because
Yeah.
LSD works in such small quantities already in such powerful ways. So then the SS started. They started a bit earlier, actually. They started with the other kind of candidate for a truth drug at the time was mescaline, and the SS did experiments with mescaline in the concentration camp of Dachau. Starting in 1943, an SS doctor called Plötner was responsible for these tests. So they gave inmates of the concentration camp coffee laced with mescaline, and then, tried to develop interrogation techniques that would utilize that, power imbalance of someone receiving a powerful psychedelic like mescaline without knowing, and then suddenly, becoming insecure and not really knowing what's going on, while the SS guy who interrogates knows exactly what's going on.
So mescaline happened before Hoffman discovered
mescaline was
LSD?
quite known in Germany. I
didn't know that.
Germany was the leading country, modern country in mescaline research in the 20s. The Professor Behringer did mescaline research at the University of Heidelberg. So mescaline was known in Germany. The problem with mescaline was that it's not so easy to make it, and it has it's not tasteless.
Yes, right.
An inmate that receives it would notice that he or she receives something. So LSD had that advantage of being tasteless and odorless, and worked in very small quantities. So Kuhn became, enthusiastic about LSD, and LSD was then tested by the Nazis, which is, it is what it is. But then what happened when the concentration camp of Dachau was liberated by the US military in the spring of 1945, when the US successfully invaded Germany from the west, was that these papers, these tests done by the SS with mescaline and this other hallucinogenic drug, fell into the hands of the US military. And the US military actually had special units attached to their military units, and these units were called ALSOS, ALSOS. And these ALSOS units that those were soldiers, but also scientists, or at least trained soldiers. And their job was to find German scientists and investigate their findings, especially in regards to the nuclear bomb, because America was, feverishly trying to construct one, but hadn't succeeded yet. And the idea was that the Nazis were also trying to develop a nuclear bomb, and that they probably had, come pretty close. So that's why ALSOS was created, to kind of get the information from the German scientists. And a side kind of project of ALSOS was to also find knowledge about biochemical weapons. So they interrogated German scientists, and they interrogated also Kuhn, because he was one of the leading German scientists in biochemical warfare and so on. So American specialists talked to Kuhn in the spring of 1945 in Heidelberg, and he basically spilled the beans. Like, he didn't hold back, because he had the choice of either relating his knowledge or everything he knew to the Americans, cooperate basically, or possibly land in Nuremberg at the war crime, at the tribunal, at the war crime trials. And so he preferred to collaborate with the Americans. So US military knew in the spring of 1945 about LSD, and was indeed very interesting in it from the start, because they thought, if the Nazis are so interested in it, maybe it is very interesting. A general traveled down to Basel, because he, received the information from Kuhn that LSD is being, you can get it in Basel at the Sandoz company. And that general received it, actually. That was the first time an American then had LSD, an American general in that case. And then the military, they didn't really start their own tests, because they maybe had other things to do, but they did employ a Harvard professor called Henry K. Beecher, who had been working for the US military before, who had been kind of the drug expert for the US military. And then Beecher received the reports that the SS had done in Dachau with psychedelic drugs, and also the new information that LSD is, might be the great truth drug, and that it's being made in Switzerland. And so Beecher became very interested in it. I mean, it was his job. So he wrote reports on what he called ego-depressant drugs. And those reports landed on the desk then of the CIA, because in 1947 the CIA was founded, and the CIA then kind of took over these the truth drug quest. And it was one guy actually at the CIA. His name is Sidney Gottlieb. He was the director of a program called MK Ultra, which was basically a program designed to make the US stronger in the Cold War, which already had started with the Soviet Union, which was a war of the minds, as it was seen, a propaganda war. So MK Ultra was a program that was interested in mind control and also in truth drugs. So this is kind of how LSD suddenly landed in the lap of the CIA, and that was a very, very bad start for LSD, basically.
Oh, here's just let me read a couple of things from the book, because
Sorry
so
for the
this
long
guy,
answer.
yeah, no, it's perfect. Gottlieb, he decided to start dosing his colleagues with acid. So some he informed ahead of time, others he didn't. And in each case, he studied the different reactions. A wild time began at CIA headquarters near the White House. I mean, just thinking about that, and it's extraordinary. And someone in the open plan, I love this part, Norman. Someone in the open plan office might turn his back on the wrong person and unbeknownst to him, wind up with a few hundred micrograms in his morning coffee. It was a game with the mind, and sometimes embarrassing things happened. Case-hardened spooks would break down crying or go all gooey about the brotherhood of man, quote unquote. One neurotic agent described his trip as follows. I was shaky at first, but then I just experienced it and had a high. I felt that everything was working right. I was like a locomotive going at top efficiency. Sure, there was stress, but not in a debilitating way. It was like the stress of an engine pulling the longest train it ever pulled, meaning your ego. That is so great. I mean, it's a wonderful, it's the idea. Well, just so you know, everybody who's listening, by the way, Norman and I have never met before. We met through a friend who's doing a doc that you're part of, correct, Norman? Documentary film.
Yeah, yeah.
That'll be interesting.
We're turning the book trip into a mini series, probably 4-part mini
Uh-huh.
series, and so that's actually quite interesting
Yeah.
because we can go even deeper than the book does.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. But as I said, I don't even, Norman, do you know my own relationship with Richard Alpert, nay Ram Dass?
I know a little bit, yeah, but
Mhm.
I'm happy to learn more. And I mean, for you, it was probably also a bit surprising, or maybe you had a question mark on your
What?
forehead why I didn't go more into what actually happened in the 60s with Alpert and
Leary.
Leary. I mean, I go a little bit into what happened with Leary,
Mm-hmm.
but I tried to explain it before. I was really focused on the time before, so I'm not really an expert on LSD in the 60s. I know a little bit, but
Well,
it,
that's where we come from,
yeah.
my generation, and the thing that Ram Dass ended up doing, actually,
Yeah.
that uh, changed a lot of stuff. He had a guru in India, an enlightened
Mm,
being in India, and when he first met him, wherever he went, he always had, a bunch of orange sunshine or white lightning, whatever the latest thing. By the way, that's great that you have you talk about who I love. In the opening chapter, you talk. Hang on a second. You talk about Leonard Pickard.
yeah.
So I met him. A couple of years ago, after he had just gotten out.
Mm.
Leonard, everybody, was the largest maker of LSD known to humanity, basically.
Yeah, he's
But
great.
Leonard, and he got sent to jail. It's a whole other story. You can listen to the podcast that I did with Leonard, but he was in jail for 20 years and then came out. And he came out. Most people come out, so we say, a little upside down. He came up
Mm,
righteous. I mean, he
mm,
is so connected to true
mm,
being that we all are. He found that. Um, but anyhow, all's to say that my own relationship with Ram Dass, he was a teacher, then a friend, and somebody I've worked. This foundation where this Be Here Now podcast network sits is under Love Serve Remember, which was Ram Dass's foundation. Um,
mm,
but the way that this guy said, sure, there was stress, but not in a debilitating way, that totally speaks to the
mm,
efficacy of of psychedelics in general.
mm,
The ability to go in behind all of the quote unquote stuff. And it's
mm,
not like it disappears, but your attachment to it, your reactivity to it, absolutely lessons. So it's one of the big lessons of psychedelics in the way we would say um, embarking on a path. We call it here a spiritual path, but embarking on a path of inner inquiry to find out who we are behind all of the story we tell ourselves and the thoughts and emotions and so on and so forth. So I just love this one little thing this guy said, a CIA guy. I thought, wow, that was so cool. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting to research this book, and also meeting Leonard was one of the great benefits of, researching this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I must check out your talk with him.
Yeah,
Sure.
no, you like it. We also did, we're starting to do these day events and maybe going to turn into something, seminars over a few days around the perspective of science, spirituality, and psychedelic insights. So delving into what's the outcome of doing this, doing these drugs? What is the integration process? So that it's not just something I might, have had an experience on a weekend or something. And so anyhow, that is what ultimately Ram Dass represented, the spiritual connecting into the psychological, basically. And, that's a major contribution.
Didn't he give LSD to his guru, and the guru didn't
Yes.
feel
Now, I
anything?
met the guru as well, because he
Yeah.
went back the second time, and I went back with him. A number of Westerners went back at that time. And so it's a fun story, because when he gave him the initial, he's just given to me, because he pulled out, he had, I guess, a number of tablets in his palm, and he said, no, just give them to me. And then he took them, and nothing happened. He did say, this is good for beginners, and it opens up door, actually how he said it opens up a door is that you get to be with Christ for a few hours. That's how he characterized it. But then you got to leave. Better to ultimately feed people, love people, something. So anyhow, Ram Dass went back to the West, and he started talking and lecturing and doing all that stuff. But he had in the back of his mind, geez, that was a lot of micrograms. I can't believe nothing happened. I mean, collectively, well over 1,000. He said, I want, maybe he was joking or something, or he was putting me on, and he, in a flash, it didn't go in his mouth. It went to the side or something. So he had these thoughts like, okay, I don't know, did it really happen or not? He went back the second time, when we, all the Westerners, went back with him. Not with him, but gradually gathered around Neem Karoli Baba, who's the name of the guru. And he sits down. He still has a bunch of, he's always carrying the acid around, so he's still got more acid, right? We used to call him maharaj-ji. He said to Ram Dass, you got any more of that, what he called yogi medicine? And Ram Dass said, yeah. So you didn't think I took it last time, right? And okay. He said, give me some. And he had it in his palm. He would take one tab, but he took a number of tabs, and he'd take it one at a time. I put it on his tongue and eat it. So see, it's happening. Anyhow, again, nothing happened. He joked around with him, and, nothing really happened. And what's interesting that's connected to your book and your story to me, my father came to visit me in India. So he was an advertising guy, I'm from Montreal, so he's Canadian. And he had been in World War II. He had been a bomber pilot attached to the British Air Force, Canadian Air Force attached to the British. And he and one other person survived his squadron. It was, as we know, what happened in that war. So many people died. And he came back with gigantic PTSD, And I don't think that they even called it that back then, just whatever derangement. But yeah, a very, very angry man. No longer could. I don't dream anymore. Yeah, well, that's because you're so blocked, that you can't access them, and so on and so forth. But he got interested enough to actually say, "I'm going to come visit you in India." Which, back then it wasn't as boom as it is now. Get on a plane and there's
How
lots of.
old were you?
I was 24, and he was like, what, 25 years older than me, 24, 34, 40. Yeah, he was around 50, something like that. So, it wasn't nothing. So he came there, and he's sitting down. We go to meet the guru, and we're sitting down with him, and then suddenly maharaj-ji guru says to me, after he tells my father lots of stuff that nobody could know, he got on the plane with, where it stopped in Frankfurt and all that. Anyhow, he looked at me and he went, "Did you give him the medicine?" To my father, I said, yeah, he had a cold. I gave him some aspirin. He said, "Night, the yogi medicine Ramdas gave me." I went, "Acid?" My father went, "LSD?" And he said, "Take care of your father while you're here and meet me in 2 weeks in another city." And God bless the reality. I found a hit of acid in of all places, Benares, where people go to die for thousands and thousands of years and get burned on the banks of the Ganges. And he took it, and he had a death trip. And well, there I'm talking dead bodies, dead animals. The burning ghats, the whole
Yeah, I've
thing.
been there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So it's not nothing to be on acid at 50 odd years old, and then sitting there. And then we went back, and we met with Maharaj. He never said a word about it, except he did say the Ganges water is very pure, right? Anyhow, all to say is I had a terrible time with my father up until that moment.
Well,
And then after that, it was a whole other thing. My entire family was brought together by that very act that happened with my father. And now, go ahead.
No, I mean, I have experienced that LSD actually is good for families, because that's also what happened in my family. As soon as LSD was on the plate, we started talking, and my father started talking differently to me, more truthfully than before, and my mother was taking it, and so it is a very therapeutic thing, actually.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, completely, utterly changed. But here's the real crazy part, Norman. So, in the book, Norman describes what the CIA started to do. I mean, they started in their office, experimenting to see how people would react, just being dosed, right? Crazy stuff. But then they went around to other institutions and secretly created programs where people were given LSD, right? And it's right here in the book. They also did tests at McGill University in Montreal, okay, which is where I'm from, which is where my mother, who had massive depression, ended up at an adjunct of McGill University that was a psychiatric center. And she told me, this like long time back, she started finding out about psychedelics and so on. She said, I was given LSD when I was in the hospital. I went, really? She said, yeah, I found out later the CIA was,
That's crazy. Your
and
mother?
my mother. I read this book and I go, holy shit, this is what my mother. So I said to my mother, well, what happened when you took it? She said, I felt happy and I rose high into the sky, however you describe that. She had a good experience, though, obviously. But she was dosed, had no idea about it, and was obviously supervised by one of the psychiatrists or something. God only knows. Can you believe that?
I mean, basically what happened in the US was a continuation of the unethical human experiments that the Nazis did, obviously not in a concentration camp, but at American universities, in American and Canadian clinics. And the trick that Gottlieb used, which worked very well, was, I mean, he wanted to examine LSD on a broad scale. Like, he wanted to find out, can you manipulate people? Can you change, let's say, sexual orientation through giving LSD? Can you make someone scared through LSD? Or can you, he had lots of questions for LSD because he was interested in potentially, developing it as a weapon, as a pharmacological weapon. So how do you do all these tests? He did it in a way that the CIA gave money to neutral foundations, like the Rockefeller Foundation. I mean, somewhat neutral foundations or somewhat
Yeah.
respected foundations. And then they would finance tests and studies at universities, because these tests and studies are expensive. So universities need funding, especially for pharmacological research. But the universities, the institutions were never informed that actually the money comes from the CIA. That they thought the money comes from, let's say, the Rockefeller Foundation.
Yeah.
But so
They were laundering.
kind of, and all the results then landed on Gottlieb's desk, and he also was able to shape the research that was done, because the person who gives the money always has an influence on how it's conducted. So that was quite a efficient way of creating a huge LSD knowledge database, basically. That was so the CIA knew a lot about LSD, and MK Ultra was not a small thing. It also had a lot of aspects that were unrelated to LSD, but LSD was really at the core of it. So there was legitimate research on LSD in the 50s, because a lot of scientists and neuroscientists and therapists and psychologists were interested in it. But there was also this kind of CIA-driven research, because the CIA was thinking for a long time that this could be a weapon eventually, but it never turned out to be successful as a weapon, because LSD you can't really instrumentalize LSD.
Yeah. Can you imagine? I mean, so everybody out there, this book is about how this started and how it was connected to Nazi Germany and what they did with it and what their intent was, and the weaponizing, and the CIA just picked that up and continued that is really extraordinary.
It's very sad, actually, because the US, had just beat the Nazis, together with the Soviet Union, obviously. So they were like the shining light of democracy in a way. That's what they still were, back then, but they betrayed their ideals so quickly. And MK Ultra is really a turning point, I think, within for America. So this book, Tripped, is also a book about America and about the degeneration of democracy in America in the second half of the 20th century, especially in the 50s. That is very sad.
McCarthyism and all of it. Yeah. I love this thing, though. I just want to get a couple of other things in here before our podcast is up. But I love this research you did, and found, I think, wonderful correspondence between Hoffman and Aldous Huxley, and related to Leary. These were like these were our gurus in terms of what we were going through as kids back then, huh? And so this is great because he was asked, Aldous Huxley, about what he thought about Leary's projects, Tim and of course Richard. I have good hopes that this and similar work will result in the development of a real natural history of visionary experience, and at the same time of a technique of quote unquote applied mysticism, a technique for helping individuals to get the most out of their transcendental experience and to make use of their insights from the quote unquote other world in the affairs of this world. This is exactly stating what our purpose is in doing these seminars and everything else that we're doing, representing Ram Dass's particular and Larry purview around psychedelics and what they can do, and not in the in a clinical therapeutic setting, just normal human beings that absolutely can become different people through the truth that they discover on psychedelic journeys.
I mean, in a way, LSD is the truth drug, but in a
Yeah,
totally
right.
different way than the
Yes,
Nazis
yeah,
and the CIA
yeah,
envisioned it.
yeah. Right. It's actually the opposite, right?
They didn't want a truth drug, they wanted a control drug.
Yeah,
That's
right.
what LSD is not, because it actually is a truth drug.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Oh, everybody, here's Norman's book. It's just out, right? A couple of months ago, Norman?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll put, we will link that up when you go to the podcast, at least on BeHereNowNetwork.com, and you'll be able to find it easily. And we should put, and you know, what's the name of the other book, which was very successful, right? Blitzed?
Blitzed, yeah. That's drugs in Nazi Germany.
Yeah. Some of this is really, of course, disturbing material. Did you, yeah, I don't know, it just makes me think of this film I just saw called Lee, about a woman who became a photographer, was a model, in, I believe in France, and then went in as these camps and everything else was, you know, the destruction in Germany, and these camps were opened up. She was able to go in, and she, I think many of the iconic photos of what was going on in these camps and these railroad cars and all of it is really extraordinary. You should put up. It's quite a movie, amazing movie called Lee. Yeah. So this is. It's just amazing to me, you know, the level of darkness that came out of that period using that particular substance, which, God, I mean, you know, I don't know what my life, Norman, would have been without it. In the ways that I mentioned, my whole family, but in me personally, and the way in which I could understand something of this kind of a being that, you know, that you read about in books and so on and so forth. It's such a powerful thing. And to, you know, for you to have brought the darkness out of how this really integrated into what we're living through right now is pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. I thank you for the work that you've done, Norman.
Thanks. Well, let's thank LSD for existing, and that we can actually look at the truth story of it. I think it's quite interesting, actually.
Yeah, and that an ergot, right?
Yeah.
Hoffman stumbled on that. Of course, there's no accidents in any part of life, so
Mm.
Yeah, that was an amazing thing. And there's some great stuff in there about, in the book, particularly about Hoffman in his later years and so on.
Mm.
And how he was treated was awful as well.
Mm.
Yeah. So Tripped is the book, Norman Ohler, and you can go to BeHereNowNetwork.com and go to Mindrolling/Mindrolling, and you'll get all these links. We'll put in a link to Blitz as well. And we'll look for the series too, Norman. That should be fun.
Great. Thank you.
So again, thank you.
Yeah, it was great talking to you. I'm sending many greetings to you and all of you from Berlin, which is very dark right now, but that's just because it's a few minutes before midnight. So tomorrow morning the sun will rise again.
And that's a good way to go out. If everyone could remember, tomorrow morning the sun will rise again. That's a good...
Because it has nothing else to do, it has to rise.
Yeah, right, exactly. And ultimately that's our truth as well. So everybody, will see you next time on Mindrolling on Be Here Now Network. And don't forget, there's so many other great podcasts on the network. Norman, I don't know if you... Alan Watts. Do you know Alan Watts? Who Alan Watts is? Yeah. He's got a podcast. You can listen to some of Alan. Is I think you particularly would enjoy some of what Alan disperses in these incredible talks he has over the years. So we'll see you next time. Thank you again, Norman.
Thank you. Bye.